Okay, good evening. Pleasure to be here. My name is Simon Greenman. I'm going to talk about, get out of the code a little bit and take a sort of macro perspective about what's happening in generative AI from a sort of business, economic, and social standpoint. My day job is I run a consultancy called Best Practice AI. We're looking at AI strategy, implementation, and governance. My background, I have been involved in AI for quite some time, so I've seen all the hype waves of hype and disappointment and come many, many cycles of that. But I did code my first neural network somewhere in, I think, the early 1990s, and I got very lucky in the early days of the internet to start one of the first internet companies called MapQuest, which was sort of mapping and location services, until some friends in the audience here killed it from Google mapping perspective. But I also have been worked in the US, UK, and a lot of digital innovation jobs in companies big and small. But one of my big passions is very much the startup ecosystem here in the UK. So thank you for bringing us together, because this is such an important time for the UK and the sharing of knowledge. This graphic here, which is my god-awful attempt at mid-journey Discord, is basically the point about there's a gold rush going on. And the thing with gold rush is there's a huge amount of activity, a huge amount of money going in, but the question is who's actually going to come out the back end of this? But what's interesting about having experienced the AI waves is there's something different going on now. And it's really the speed of innovation, the speed of adoption of generative AI, and the impact it's happening. This is what I haven't seen before. And it was related to a question earlier. There's three things that seem to be driving this. One is just the exponential increase in compute. And suddenly we've got this emergent phenomena coming out of large language models when you're getting to 150 billion parameters trained on 45 trillion letters out there, a huge amount of data. The other thing as well, and it's the theme that the two great talks before, is you're getting these powerful software libraries that are incredibly powerful, that you can string together with a few lines of code and do some pretty magical stuff. When I was writing neural networks a long time ago, there was nothing like this. So we have this ability to create combinatorial innovation coming out of this. So the talk is sort of who will profit from generative AI, and what are the 5 layers of value capture. And the first layer I'll talk about is really the infrastructure, the chips and clouds. And what we've heard here is there's a huge amount of compute that's required to do this. And then sitting on top of it is the foundational model layer. And the foundational model layer in turn, what it is, it's an enabler, a general purpose AI technology that is enabling almost a Cambrian explosion of application startups. There's a startup for absolutely everything going on here. And then those applications would be applied in industry, from pharmaceuticals to financials and so on, who will capture value. And then the sort of the 5th layer is which countries are really going to benefit most from this. So I'll take a quick tour de force. It will be quite quick going through this. But the infrastructure layer, it's no surprises that we saw Microsoft investing $10 billion into OpenAI, because OpenAI needs a huge amount of compute. And then you see that Microsoft announces it's developing its own chips. Well, why? The total cost for 30,000 NVIDIA high-end chips to be able to run ChatGPT is $1.2 billion. And so Microsoft is interested, as long with Alphabet, Alpha, Meta, in getting their own chips, because there's so much value in underlying this and so much control. And then what we see in the cloud is that Amazon AWS has over 1 million cloud customers, and 100,000 customers are using their API services for AI. So it's only natural that Amazon and others are going to offer generative AI services on top. So we've got this race for the sort of the cloud chip infrastructure, and it's no surprises that sort of NVIDIA stock has really become a proxy for generative AI. And we've seen this year their stock rise quite precipitously, and they're reaching a $1 trillion sort of market cap. So the sort of the winners in the infrastructure, for the most part, are really the big chip and big tech cloud companies. Here from the US, big tech, China as well, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and the like. Just the capital cost required to build this infrastructure is absolutely huge. So that's the sort of the infrastructure layer. Then we go to the foundational model layer, and we ask the question, is it going to be big tech again that is going to really dominate here? Obviously, OpenAI Microsoft, Meta releasing their Llama models, Google with Bard, Apple will do something here as well. But the reality is, whilst there's been billions put into sort of the investment in these foundational models, there are still startup opportunities for other foundational models. There are limitations in let's say in OpenAI. It's generalist, not specialist. There's concerns over the protection of proprietary data if you're in the enterprise. The US models tend to be English language centric, and there are concerns over the lack of transparency and explainability and alike. So we are starting to see globally, when we look around, there are startups in the foundational model space. So Anthropic, and it was great to see their Claude 2.0 launch, has raised 1.45 billion. That's a pretty big startup. Cohere's raised 400 million, AI 21 Labs, 120 million. Stability AI, great, British champion, has raised 100 million at a 1 billion valuation, and so on. German Aleph Alpha has just raised 100 million. But the key point here is the level of capitalization for a startup to compete in the foundational level is massive. This one you've probably heard of, Mistral AI. What a phenomenal seed round of 105 million euros. And if you haven't read the plan that they raised this money on, you should. It's phenomenal. And the speed with which things are happening at the foundational model layer is great. How many of you have played with Claude 2? Yeah, a few of you, about probably a third. If you haven't, try it. Because in some ways it's better than OpenAI, because you can take much larger context windows. GPT-4 is sort of limited to 8K. This can take 100K. So summarize much bigger out of the box. And then the next question that's sort of going on with the foundational models and large language models, is it going to be closed like an OpenAI, or are we going to have open source? And we talked about that earlier. But what we are seeing is some of the meta models coming out, Llamas, Vicunas, now open source, their performance is starting to reach that of Bard and ChatGPT levels. So we're going to have a dominance of closed, or is open source going to have a role here? And that question's still to play out. So on top of that, and we saw this from Mystic earlier, at the foundational model layer, there's also a lot of infrastructure and operational tool companies that we're going to be using, tooling, to help us build these models, optimize these models, and perform. So that's sort of the second layer, or the foundational models. And fortunately, it is going to be the big tech who's going to predominate here, the well-capitalized startups, along with some open source. The third area, and this is where it starts getting much more interesting, there's much bigger playing field, which many of you are playing in, is the applications that are enabled by the foundational models and the startups that go with it. And what we're seeing is there's really three types of sort of applications going on here. All of the incumbent non-AI's native software, like the Microsofts, the Slacks, which is now part of Salesforce, Google, they're all integrating generative AI capabilities and bringing it to their user base. Then we've got a whole series of AI native startups that on top of these foundational models. And then we've got a third category of application startups, full stack AI startups, which are not only applications, but they're building their own large language models, their own foundational models. But that's not for the faint of heart, because depending upon who you talk to, the cost to build your own large language models starting at 2 to sort of 5 million. I don't know if people agree with that, but it's not for the faint of heart. So then, yeah, we see, I think it's fair to say that within the next year, with Microsoft and others rolling out GenAI capabilities, we'll see 1 billion users globally behind this. Phenomenal. And we've never seen that sort of speed of adoption. But then we go to all the AI startups here, California, across Europe, Israel, across the world. We've just got so many different categories and use cases of application startups. New search ones, general writing, sales and marketing, coding, customer service, user interface, knowledge management. You name it, it's happening across industry and function and task. It's that explosion there. So I'll go through a few and just illustrate I think some of the more interesting ones. There's a whole series of new AI-powered search as a sort of alternative to Google and others. Neeva, if you haven't tried that, don't, and I'll tell you why in a second. Perplexity, has anybody used Perplexity? Probably about getting on 10. If you haven't tried, this is fantastic. I swear to you, my use of Google is probably down 80% since using this, and you as well. But I say joke about Neeva is June 2nd, 2023. It's probably one of the first casualties of the gold rush here. Fantastic new search, but the question is, how do they get consumer usage and adoption? The cost to get their brand out there, awareness, was just too big. So even though they had a phenomenal product, they suffered a very early loss in this game. We're also seeing huge numbers of writing applications come out. Grammarly is probably the oldest, 400 million raised. WordTunes raised 120 million. Keep going. Sales and marketing apps. Jasper AI out of Austin, Texas, raised 145 million. And there's just a plethora of sort of startup companies going on here. What's interesting is Jasper actually just announced a layoff. I read that today. And I think the key point is behind this is how do you get defensibility of your generative AI startup? And just because you've got a shitload of money for consumer acquisition, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win at this point. All of you who've got kids or actually younger than me probably use these types of face apps and things like that, generative AI. Design apps are absolutely everywhere, and we see a huge impact on architecture, fashion, and the like from generative AI. Video apps, many of you probably used Runway, which is bringing sort of new capabilities to the forefront. Synthesia, another great British startup company. This one's doing really well and just had another big raise. Sorry, we don't have the sound here, but basically what it's doing is allowing you to create your own custom avatars just like that. Different faces, different voices, different backgrounds, and the like. So great company. And then audio speech companies are just everywhere at the moment. Splash raised 23 million, Dub 250 million, Descript 100 million. These are huge sums of money going into it. And the point being, when there's a gold rush, go big. And that's what's happening here. Games is another area where we're just seeing huge opportunities. And the reason with games is production costs from some of the larger companies are up in the hundreds of millions at this point. Now, software engineering, I'm hearing mixed reports. How many of you have used GitHub's Copilot for coding? Good, bad, indifferent? Good? Good, good. That's actually fantastic. Oh, there's a down. Why down?
It's like, for me as an engineer, it's just the depth of thinking. Maybe it's the way I'm using it, but there's so many things I have in my head when I'm engineering. And I feel like it does the basics.
Yeah.
But in terms of the depth or layers I want to go to, maybe not so.
Okay.
That could be from like some interface inversions, or even Solidity, depending on using Solidity for
Right.
blockchain engineering. So
All right.
yeah, it gets the job done for basic prototyping. That's why.
Right. Great. All right. So that's fine. But I think the consensus was sort of good, and the productivity improvements starting to look at 50% more. There was another analysis, I think just shy of a million GitHub users and showing huge productivity improvements. This one here was interesting. How many of you have played around with Code Interpreter? A few of you here. Code Interpreter just came out a week and a half ago from ChatGPT, and I'm a very bad coder, let's just put it that way, but I wanted to try it out, and I said, I'm writing a blog post about how amazing ChatGPT is at working with code right now. Create me the perfect illustration of GIF. And I took this from Ethan Mollick at Penn University and tried it. And it came back and it said, okay, I'm going to give you a perfect animated GIF from the Mandelbrot set. And you'll recognize a Mandelbrot set. And asked me, does that sound good? And I say, yes, definitely this is good. Let's do a Mandelbrot set. And what it would do is it would try to figure out the Python code to actually create that Mandelbrot set. First tries it and it finds it has an error. So then it actually goes back and tries again, comes up with the code. It's got a few problems with size, image size and memory here, so it tries again. But then it allows me to download the GIF that it's created in the Python code. And so it downloads the GIF, and this is what it's created, an animated GIF here. And that was just one basically line of natural language. So the new user interface for data and coding starts to become that. And the way it created an animated GIF is just like a movie, a series of stills that slightly change, and it stitches those together. But the examples that are coming out of how good this is for data analysis is just phenomenal. You know, if I think about what generative AI is, to me, yes, it's creative. Yes, we can create images, but it's something about the democratization of knowledge, in that what it's doing is pulling in knowledge, sort of abstracting patterns there and sharing that knowledge. And what it's allowing people to do is come up the cognitive hierarchy and be better, quicker from all of this shared knowledge. So this is some example of FinChat, which would be from the financial services industry. Instead of having analysts go off and look at lots of financial reports, put all your reports into a library such as Pinecone, a vector library, and then you actually start asking questions against it. It's phenomenal what's going on here. This is interesting, which is, I think, the theme also coming out about generative AI is the whole user interface is going to change. And at the moment, if we're in a company, we've got ERP, CRM systems, we have to click, we have to filter, and it's really cumbersome to get what we want to. We just want to put in a natural language query. So this is an example of Adept, where instead of going through Redfin, the real estate agent site, and searching, clicking, so on, just type in what you want. I want a house in Houston that costs like this, and it will interpret the user interface for you. And I think we're going to see this type of user interface just absolutely change the world of software wherever we go. So huge number of startup companies here. But for looking at from the investment side, we have to be careful about investing in startups because of the defensibility. It's so easy to actually put this together now. So investors are sort of asking the question, what is it makes for a good startup in the Gen AI space? And no surprises, need a strong ROI, a use case, quick demonstration of value. Can you customize the models? Do you have IP? Can you fine tune it on your own data sets? So you have proprietary data sets. A lot of the applications are B2B, so can we make sure it's integrated into the workflow? Is there feedback loops so that the data gets better over time, the models get better over time, we have a flywheel dynamics and things. So there's a lot of questions from investors right now, and some sitting on the sidelines saying, not sure how defensible it is. But an area of defensibility is not only have an application, but have build your own large language models beneath it. And so that's why you're seeing companies like Adept for the user interface raising 350 million, Character AI building their own chatbots, conversational technologies, raising 200 million. You might have seen Bloomberg has its own LLMs for financial markets, and the drug discovery companies and pharmaceutical are building huge sort of LLMs around the language of proteins, DNA, and alike. So the defensibility can come from going down that area, but it's not cheap. I mean, some of you might have seen Glassed AI, which is building its own clinical data for medical diagnostics for doctors. It's not getting bad. I had a doctor look at this. But you're typing in some symptoms, 71-year-old, some of the symptoms here, and it starts coming up and generating a clinical plan for the patient. So I think summing up and moving on, the application layer winners are going to be the incumbents are going to do very well here. I think the reason Jasper's hurting as a sales and marketing company, because basically what Microsoft's rolling out, well-funded startups and full stack applications here, but there's a whole race going on. How much time do we have, by the way? Yeah, wrap it up? Yeah, okay, no problems. So finally, the impact on industries and jobs. Will AI take my job? Won't it take my job? And it's a big question for society here. And we can see that those activities involving decision-making and collaboration, which previously had the lowest potential for automation, are at risk. And that's kind of scary. It's the white-collar jobs that we thought wouldn't be replaced. But you're seeing reports from the likes of McKinsey's and others that are analysing that the sectors around education, services, professional services, legal field, consultancy fields, creatives and administrative tasks are going to be vulnerable to generative AI. Now, what's interesting is that's the UK. What are we good at in the UK? Education, legal, professional services, creatives, pharmaceuticals. We better get effing moving as a country on actually adopting this stuff. And spread that message, by the way, because it's good for all of us if generative AI goes on. So there's lots of studies around what the impact on productivity is going to be. There was one great study coming out of Stanford showing that customer service agents, you can improve productivity by 14 to 35%. And it shows again, it's those with the least knowledge who can be brought up the most quickly to those with that. So the winners in industry are really going to be those who do embrace these technologies. And for all of us here, it's an opportunity to really sort of lead by example and get our companies, organizations to embrace. So that's it from my perspective. But what I'm most excited about with generative AI is the benefits that will reach globally. And that is the sort of the democratization of generative AI tools that will amplify our powers, but also reduce inequities around the world in writing, education, healthcare, and so much more. And then the next frontier is sort of understanding the language of DNA, proteins, our bodies, and just drug discovery. So, so thank you very much. And there you go.